We've never gotten a big screen version of one of Spidey's most famous challenges, the nefarious Sinister Six. Or have we? The Sinister Six might already exist in the MCU, even if you've never noticed. If you're not familiar with them, the Sinister Six have a history with Spidey that dates back all the way to 1964. While every issue advanced the superhero soap opera that was the Marvel Universe back then, the publishing schedule was punctuated by special oversized issues that, because they were meant to be a once-a-year spectacular, were called annuals. Across the street at DC Comics, annuals were pretty much just big reprints designed to get classic stories into the hands of readers who had missed them the first time around, often built around a theme. At Marvel, things were done a little differently. While their annuals did feature reprints of key stories, the lead story in every issue was not only all new material, it was also something meant to be a pretty big deal. The Fantastic Four annuals gave readers an origin for Doctor Doom, a war between Atlantis and the surface world, and the wedding of Reed Richards and Sue Storm, an oversized epic that guest-starred the entire Marvel Universe circa 1965, including Stan Lee and Jack Kirby themselves. For the first Spider-Man annual, the idea that Stan Lee and Steve Ditko came up with was one of the simplest ways to make a story feel important. If one supervillain could make a regular issue seem like a big deal, then why not throw in a few more? In fact, why not take virtually every Spider-Man villain who had been created over the past year and throw them all against Spidey in one massive all-out brawl? When it hit the stands in Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 1, the Sinister Six clocked in at 41 pages and contained some of Lee and Ditko's best work ever. The idea was simple. After escaping from prison, Dr. Octopus gathered 5 villains who wanted revenge on Spider-Man: Electro, the Vulture, Mysterio, the Sandman, and Kraven the Hunter. After figuring out that Spider-Man had some kind of connection to them, Doc Ock kidnapped Betty Brant and Aunt May, leaving behind clues that would lead Spidey from one villain to the next. It was basically a scavenger hunt, but with a strong chance of being mauled by leopards. Ditko punctuated each of the battles with a full-page splash of Spidey taking on the bad guys, which was something that wasn't actually seen that often back then. The editors of the 60s figured kids would feel ripped off if each page wasn't crammed full of story. But it's hard to imagine any fan looking at a massive shot of Spider-Man crashing through a wall to punch out Mysterio while threatening to play a drum solo on that glass fishbowl and think it was anything but awesome. Needless to say, the story was a hit, and that original lineup, with Otto Octavius as the mastermind, would go down in Marvel history as one of the greatest villainous teams ever assembled. Surprisingly, the Sinister Six didn't make another appearance for a while. It wasn't until 1990 that we got the team's proper return in a story appropriately called The Return of the Sinister Six. The only big difference was the addition of the Hobgoblin to the roster, replacing the temporarily deceased Kraven. Unlike the original straightforward tale, however, the return was full-on bonkers. Not only did it see the death of Aunt May's elderly boyfriend Nathan, but it was built around Doc Ock manipulating the other villains into a world domination plot, and then revealing an insane twist. He was really launching a satellite that would extort wealthy addicts by causing them to painfully convulse whenever they did cocaine. Fortunately, with the help of a face turn from the Sandman, Spider-Man was able to defeat Doc Ock and make the world safe for cocaine once again. That story cemented the Sinister Six as the Marvel Universe's premier villain team and paved the way for them to branch out in more ways than one. They've appeared as a team in multiple Spider-Man cartoons, as well as video games from the NES all the way to 2018's PS4 Spider-Man. They're even in Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, the Broadway musical. The only place they haven't been yet is the movie theater, unless they've actually been there all along. If the Sinister Six do show up in the MCU, it's likely that it won't be the classic lineup that was introduced back in Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 1, for one simple reason. Movies tend to shy away from using the same villains that have been seen before with other versions of the character. Before the MCU, half the original roster had already shown up in Spider-Man movies. Dr. Octopus, played by Alfred Molina rocking the rarely seen 2 trench coats at the same time look, was in Spider-Man 2. The Sandman appeared alongside Venom and a dancing Peter Parker in Spider-Man 3. 2014's Amazing Spider-Man 2 brought in Jamie Foxx as Electro, but it's okay if you forgot about that one.
What's your name again?
How could you forget me?
Oh, I do. I know it. Don't tell me.
It's Max.
Is it Max?
As far as the other half of the classic lineup goes, the Vulture was the primary villain of Spider-Man: Homecoming, and Mysterio is in Spider-Man: Far From Home. The only one who's missing entirely is Kraven the Hunter, but that's not a huge problem. There are more Spider-Man villains floating around in the Marvel Cinematic Universe who could be used in his place. In the span of a single film, Spider-Man managed to encounter more of his classic foes than Iron Man did in 10 years. The obvious one, of course, was the Vulture, but he's just the tip of the villainous iceberg. On the off chance that you missed it, take a closer look at Adrian Toomes and the cabal of high-tech arms dealers that used to be his construction crew, and you'll see both the Shocker and the Tinkerer, who debuted alongside the Vulture back in Amazing Spider-Man #2. There's also an appearance by the Prowler and the Scorpion. Thanks to Into the Spider-Verse, those two wound up being two unlikely picks for Spider-Foes who would both make it into two different movie universes in the span of 18 months. That's 5 major Spider-Man villains. 4 major villains and the Tinkerer, really, and they're just the ones we know for sure. Peter has a science teacher named Mrs. Warren in Homecoming who might very well turn out to be the MCU's version of the Jackal, who in the comics is Peter's old science teacher, Miles Warren. Of course, that's just if, for some reason, they want to do a movie about spider clones in spite of everyone who was reading Spider-Man comics in the 90s begging them not to. Generally speaking, superhero movies have a villain problem. Not only do the villains tend to just be palette-swapped versions of the good guys, but they also have an unfortunate tendency to die after a single film. Even when the villains are interesting and compelling in their own right, like Eric Killmonger in Black Panther, they usually only last for a single film before they're killed off. Or they used to be, until Homecoming. Admittedly, there were MCU villains who stuck around before that, including Helmut Zemo in Captain America: Civil War and Baron Mordo in Doctor Strange. Thanos also appeared in a handful of movies, although he managed to die twice in the last one, which kinda makes up for it. Think about other major Marvel villains, though. Ultron, whose entire deal is that he comes back deadlier every time he's defeated, was thoroughly obliterated at the end of the film that bears his name. Ego, the Living Planet, was blown up after fighting a giant holographic Pac-Man. These are powerhouse villains in the comics who just cease to exist in the films. And that makes sense, too. As much as the MCU films form an ongoing universe, they're not made for the perpetual publication schedule that comics have, so there's no real reason to keep the bad guys around if you think you can tell a more compelling story by killing them. Once again, Killmonger is the prime example of a villain whose death is meant to mean something larger than just the end of the film. The thing is, when that's the default setting that every movie goes with, it stands out when the villains don't die. Loki, for instance, has stabbed his way into the hearts of moviegoers across the world precisely because he just keeps surviving to get another one over on Thor.
Surprise!
It becomes a universe where characters only stick around if, like Loki, there are plans for them in the future. That brings us again back to Spider-Man: Homecoming. It makes a point of keeping its villain around, and only partly because rescuing the bad guy says a lot about who Peter Parker is and why he does what he does. That leads to the epilogue in prison, where the Vulture encounters Mac Gargan. On the surface, it feels like another subversion of what we expect from the superhero movie formula. When he's given the chance to assemble a team of villains and reveal Parker's identity, Toomes doesn't take it.
If I knew who he was, he'd already be dead.
Whether it's because he's not the bad guy he pretends to be when he threatens Peter in the car, which seems unlikely because he buries him under a few tons of warehouse cement immediately after, or because he realizes he owes Spider-Man his life, he gives up on the opportunity. The scene shows us something else, though. The fact that Gargan is still around and trying to make connections with other people who want revenge against Spider-Man shows that the groundwork is already there for a sinister team-up. If nothing else, Spider-Man is the first hero in the entirety of the Marvel Cinematic Universe to have 6 enemies who are both mad at him and still alive. All of this is, of course, pure speculation, but it's pretty easy to look at a movie where the bad guys are kept around and assume that this is all building to something big. It's also pretty easy to imagine how it could go down. Hydro Man fits pretty easily into the same role as the Sandman without the baggage of being in one of the worst-received Spider-Man movies, and the same goes for the Shocker replacing Electro. As much as fans would love to see his crop-top lion vest, Kraven could easily be substituted with a revenge-seeking lizard. And if the Vulture truly is done with his Spidey fighting days, the Jackal could conceivably fill the void of the older science weirdo. Throw in the Tinkerer as the wild card/tech guy, and that's a pretty solid Sinister Six. And again, those are just the characters we know about. Who knows what villains Marvel might pull from the comics in the future? Who's to say they won't toss in Stegron the Dinosaur Man for good measure? From a storytelling standpoint, building to the Sinister Six might not even be necessary. As much as we love to imagine Spider-Man as the everyman hero who balances his superheroic life with his everyday problems, that requires a Spider-Man who's always struggling against the odds. Meanwhile, the cinematic Peter Parker has crammed a whole lot of living into a very short time. In the 3 years since he was introduced, the MCU's Spider-Man has gone toe-to-toe with Captain America, rocketed off to outer space, fought Thanos on the other side of the universe, spent 5 years as a pile of dust before being resurrected from the dead, and fought Thanos again on Earth alongside dozens of other superheroes, including at least 2 literal gods. It's kinda hard to go back to just fighting the Rhino after that. The Rhino and 5 of his very angry buddies, on the other hand, sounds like the right kind of challenge. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite Marvel movies are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.